The territory of Ethiopia in its entirety is from one end to the other, subject to the government of His Majesty of the Emperor. All natives of Ethiopia, subject of the empire, form together the Ethiopian Empire. This is 1931. And this one is in 1907. Look at the years between 1907 and 1931. Consequently, the land tenure in Ethiopia showed the status of the conquerors and the conquered nations and nationalities. Out of this result, the old Abyssinian North, the relationship of man to land was ruled by the traditional right called rist. Everybody had the right to access land. The community had the collective responsibility to make sure everyone got the land he needed. The village in Amhara areas, blood relations limited access to the recourse, and community claimants that could prove descent from village, mythical or real, are founding fathers accepted as members and got access to land. Haile Selassie named all provinces, see figure 4, this is the figure 4, that was partitioned to races and promulgated a legal provision resembling private property in land rights. It was called freehold and included all the important rights to land in the hands of these invaders. Later, Haile Selassie introduced the rule and tax payment for a consecutive number of years was documentary evidence of ownership in the court. Of course, the nobility or the Nefteñas were the first to know about this new trend and saw to it that they paid the tax in their name, collecting it from the colonized subjects. After some years, the colonized subjects were legally dispossessed of their land without their knowledge. It became only evident where dispute arose and court decided in favor of the settler colonizer. At the head of Haile Selassie's regime, the royal family and the nobility owned about over 50% of the Oromo land, and 33% belonged to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. However, the continuous domination and suppression, exclusion and exploitation of colonized peoples by the minority ruling group called for resistance. Thus, the question of nationalities became central to the conflict. It was first illustrated in Walilin Makon's article in the publication of the Ethiopian Student Movement, The Struggle, November 1969. It reads, "It's not simply Amhara. To a certain extent, Amhara Tigray supremacy. Is it not simply Amhara, and to a certain extent Amhara Tigray supremacy? Ask anybody what Ethiopian culture is. Ask anybody what Ethiopian language is. Ask anybody what Ethiopian music is. Ask anybody what Ethiopian religion is. Ask anybody what national dress is. It is either Amhara or Amhara Tigray. To be a genuine Ethiopian, one has to speak Amharic, listen to Amharic music, to accept the Amhara Tigray religion, Orthodox Christianity, and to wear the Amhara Tigray Shama in international conferences. In some cases, to be an Ethiopian will be even you have to change your name. In short, to be an Ethiopian, you'll have to wear an Amharic mask." And this is what yesterday Obota said. The system was assimilatory, discriminatory, and etc. Most probably you must have seen Obolencho's article on the issue of how the politics of identity started in 1933, when Amharic was declared as the only language of Ethiopia. And this explains the problem in which we are today, how it started and how it developed. Both negative and positive reaction to Wallin's article still continues to raise heated debate between the elites favoring settler colonialism and the fighting for liberation. The birth of the Oromo Liberation Front. Ladies and gentlemen, the Oromo resisted Ethiopian colonial expansion and domination both militarily and culturally in localized and scattered ways. The Oromo rose in frequent rebellions, the largest of which broke out in Raya Azebo in 1948 and Vale in 1960 and resulted in the deaths of many people. Peacefully, in 1936, the Oromo leaders also appealed via the British government to League of Nations for self-determination, for self-government. However, the peaceful quest was given deaf ear by superpowers. During Haile Selassie regime, the monarchical and colonial nature of the Ethiopian empire did not allow the Oromo to form political organizations that would allow them for political expression. Legally, it was only possible to form self-help associations. Accordingly, in the beginning of 1960s, there were 3 Oromo self-help associations in Finfinne, namely as Jibat Mecha, the Meta Robi, and Tulama Shawa self-help associations. These 3 associations merged together in 1963 to 1964 and formed the Mecha Tulama Self-Help Association. The formation of Mecha Tulama Self-Help Association in Finfinne or Addis Ababa and the Arfankallo and Biftu Ganamo musical groups in Redawa in the 1960s marked the public rise of the Oromo nationalism. Consequently, the government feared of Oromo national consciousness and it has conspired the leaders of association and banned the associations. As the Ethiopian government denied the Oromo any channel through which to express their national interest, Oromo revolutionaries established an underground political movement. This was a new epoch in Oromo struggle, which led to the first establishment of Oromo Liberation Front in 1973. The birth of the Oromo Liberation Front in 1973 brought new hope for the Oromo. The OLF aimed to create an Oromo national movement that would allow the Oromo people to decide their political future democratically through referendum. It did not wish to impose its will on the Oromo, but maintained that only the Oromo people can decide whether to create an independent Republic of Oromia or to build multinational democracy by joining other peoples in the federal, confederal, or non-federal arrangement. The stereotype of the Ethiopian statehood derived from hierarchical and authoritarian social structure of the northern highlands, which are resistant to political accommodation, ruling upon the egalitarian annexed nations and nationalities, remained as carrot and stick in politics of Ethiopia. Therefore, it was not accidental that since 1970s, almost all major political forces and major liberation movements, such as the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, Oromo Liberation Front, OLF, and the Ogaden National Liberation Front, ONLF, have always been not only rooted but also geared toward this resolving their deep-rooted conflict. On the contrary, some pan-Ethiopian organizations remained antagonistic to this liberation movement rather than dialoguing with them. Ladies and gentlemen, all fought the Ethiopian military government on east, south, and west part of Oromia until regime fall in 1991. OLF was the third strongest organization that has registered victory in combat against the brutal regime of Mengistu. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF, fought a 30 years of war of liberation. OLF and its military wing, Oromo Liberation Army, has never participated in terroristic activities that has always been the ugly face of the Ethiopian regime. Our fighting force always engaged in itself against the government soldiers and security agents only. However, it was labeled as terrorist by former guerrilla organization, the TPLF regime, which is the irony of history. As Haile Selassie had done before them, the Derg also continued the practice of extreme centralization and denied both individual and collective rights of nations and nationalities and also individual democratic rights. The junta replaced one extremely brutal regime by another. Centralization and homogenization under the culture of one ethnic group severely suppressed the Oromo and others culturally, economically, and politically, and only perpetuated domination. In April 1976, the Provisional Military Administrative Council promulgated its program for the National Democratic Revolution, which later accepted self-determination of nations and nationalities and regional autonomy. Accordingly, Eritrea, Tigray, Assab, Duree, and Ogaden were delineated by the to be autonomous. Remarkably, here it rather divided the Oromo land, Oromia, into more administrative regions, about 24. However, Derg's futile attempt of creating the so-called autonomous region, which were totally subordinated to the national government and denial of the Oromo rights, never saved it from the mess. Ladies and gentlemen, the Derg's 1973 land reform abolished the Gabbard system, which subjected the people to tenancy on their own lands, but it still failed to restore land ownership rights, which people had lost with the coming of conquest. Moreover, in less than a decade after the reform, the Derg started depossessing the peasants through its villagization, collectivization, and massive settlement programs and grain marketing policies. The Derg's effort to perpetuate national domination using Marxism-Leninism as a cover was resisted by organized national liberation movements such as the Oromo Liberation Front, the Eritrean Liberation Front, and the Tigray Liberation Front, and the Ogaden National Liberation Front, and other political organizations that were fighting for democracy. The policies of the military regime directly aimed at combating Oromo nationalism, beginning with the forced villagization, resettlement in Oromia region, imprisonment and persecution of Oromo intellectuals, and military deployment in areas where Oromo guerrillas operated. In general, military rule guided by garrison socialism, as Professor Marara states, was unable to resolve the root cause of national conflict in Ethiopia. After the Derg's regime was toppled, the transitional government was established after National Conference held in July 1991, in which all parties opposed to the military regime took part, among them the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, the Oromo Liberation Front, and the Oromo Liberation Front. The National Conference set the charter for transitional period that was assumed to prepare the country for an all-out change, a smooth democratization process and transition. A new arrangement of regional states based mainly on ethno-linguistic contour of the population was established. This was, you remember, this is the base of the present form of Ethiopia, which Dr. Desalegn formally explained. It recognized Ethiopia as a multinational and multi-ethnic society in which the political, economic, linguistic, and cultural interests of the various nations and nationalities in the empire are to be recognized, protected, and promoted. The basic principle that guided this agreement was free and voluntary association of peoples, recognition in principle of the right to self-determination of nations and nationalities in the empire. Through the charter, the conference established a transitional government consisting of legislative body, or the House of Representatives, and executive branch, Council of Ministers. In the transitional charter and in the constitution, which came into effect later in 1995, human and democratic rights were to be upheld in conformity with the principle of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights and international covenants. After the 1992 snap election, in which Oromo Liberation Front won the landslide victory in Oromia, the TPLF-EPRDF started to focus on politics of power protection and consolidation through planned manipulation of the transitional process. Massive intimidation and murder of members and supporters of other political parties, particularly that of OLF. This resulted in forced withdrawal of the OLF and other forces such as the All Amhara People's Organization, Ethiopian Democratic Action Group, EDAG, Gedawa People's Democratic Organization, GEPOD, Ogaden National Liberation Front, and Sidama Liberation Movement from the transitional government. Other political parties and liberation movements were disqualified afterward because of their participation in Paris Peace Conference in 1993. And again, we lost the opportunity for democratic resolution of political problems in Ethiopia. The transitional period that was expected to usher democracy, peace, and development to this traumatized part of Africa was thwarted by the TPLF-EPRDF, which monopolized power and installed in a single-party absolute rule. It held fake elections in 1995, 2000, 2005, 2010, and 2015, in which a lone competitor it used to announce to the world that it won democratic elections with landslide. To sum up, the Oromo Liberation Front was born to resist the brutal oppression and social and political economic exploitation and subjugation of the Oromo people by the Ethiopian political system. This necessity brought about a centralized and secular OLF 1973-1974. The sacrifice of thousands of Oromo nationalists has resulted in the recognition of Oromo and Oromia as unified polity in Ethiopian political system in 1991. TPLF is claiming that nationality-based federal system and conducting regular national election to have transformed the Ethiopian state from authoritarian to a democratic one. The claim to have changed an empire previously dominated by ruling ethnic group with command economy to a democratic society and free market economy. In practice, none of them were implemented, and consequently, the struggle of the Oromo people for liberation from all sorts of oppression remained ongoing project and immense sacrifice paid during the last 27 years. It is these continued sacrifices and bitter struggles that brought the present opportunity for change. Blackmailing of Oromo Liberation Front, diverting of public attention and attention of international community from legitimate quest of the Oromo people for freedom and democracy has always been the sinister of the successive Ethiopian regimes. This practice is common. That we mentioned here is the tip of the iceberg. Oromo individuals, civic organizations, and Oromo liberation organizations were and still are labeled, eliminated on various pretexts. To mention some, one, the case of blackmailing the Machatu Lama Self-Help Association by Emperor Haile Selassie. In 1966, public rallies and meetings were organized in villages, towns, and cities in several places of Oromia by Machatu Lama Association. Consequently, the government feared of Oromo national consciousness and conspired against the leaders of the association. The Haile Selassie government used an explosion at the cinema hall in Addis Ababa as a pretext for its conspiracy. Ironically, the exploded device were planted by government security men, one of whom lost hands while planting the device. The government imprisoned the key leaders of the association, all of them severely tortured. The emperor assigned 5 of his staunch supporters. These were Blatta Demise Workena, Brigadier General Shifarrao Tasamma, Brigadier General Walda Sadiq Gabra Mikael, Afark Saidu Walda Medin, and Mr. Damto Fanta. The man who took responsibility in organizing the special court was Colonel Tafarra Gabramariam. It was a kangaroo court. It was on the order of the court of our national hero of the late Mamo Mazamur was sentenced to death by hanging, while several others were given lifelong sentence of imprisonment. Many, like founding fathers of the association, Haile Mariam Gammada, died in the prison from unnatural causes. General Taddese Burru, the chairman of the association, sentenced to lifelong exile and sent to remote town of Galamso in Hararge. After the fall of the Haile Selassie, General Taddese left the exile and started armed struggle in the countryside in Shah. In 1974, General Taddese immediately declared land to be free for those who work on it. The military junta hurriedly declared the nationalization of the rural land in order to preempt the land issue of the Oromo and arrested General Taddese, sentenced him to death by firing squad on March 13, 1975. 2. International state-sponsored terrorism. While preaching the principle of rights of self-determination, particularly to obscure the cause of Oromo liberation struggle, the military regime of Ethiopia sent an assassination squad for cross-border state terrorism to West Germany, Berlin. The plan was to kill Reverend Gunnar Hasselblad and an Oromo veteran Taye Tafarra on March 20, 1982. However, the mission failed when the bomb again blasted on the squad mounting the plot. Similarly, Mr. Jatani Ali Thandu, one of the Transitional Council members representing OLF in the Transitional Council, was assassinated by TPLF-EPRDF, killing squad in Nairobi on 2nd July 1992. On the 8th of February 2000, OLF Executive Committee member Mr. Mullis Abbagada was assassinated in Mogadishu. And on 5th of February 2008, 65 Oromo refugees were murdered and more than 100 others were injured in Bosaso, Puntland, Somalia. 3. Appeal letters, lobbies, and hilarious film dramas of the TPLF regime accusing OLF with terrorism is sham. The APRDF regime made various attempts to label the liberation struggle of Oromo people by associating it with terrorism, and its own 2001 attacks brought increased American involvement in the Horn of Africa and an alliance with Ethiopian against terrorism. Horrendous film titled Addis Ababa Like Baghdad and Akaldema, aired by the Ethiopian TV in 2011, were only meant to tint world public opinion against OLF and Oromo national liberation struggle. The documentary is extremely defamatory and portrays OLF and the liberation fighters as violators of human rights, while the facts showed the direct opposite. Ladies and gentlemen, since the OLF left the transitional government, the Oromo were arrested in mass and detained in various military camps such as Kurso in the east, Agarfa in Bale, in Sidamo and Didesa, Walaga, various detention centers, private places such as warehouses and unknown residential areas were used as prison. Most of them were alleged and labeled as terrorists, narrow nationalists, danger of territorial integrity of the country, treason act, Muslim fundamentalists. However, the true cause behind this mass arrest was that most of these people either attended a course in Oromo language and history, or they protested against the banning of Oromo civic organizations such as Human Rights League, Oromo Relief Association, Machatulama Self-Help Association, and various newspapers such as Urji, Bakalcha, and so on, for their demanding freedom of press and release of political prisoners.